Race to the finish. The latest from our White House and Capitol Hill teams as they track key midterm election contests. Missile barrage. Why South Korea's president is demanding action against Pyongyang. Affirmative action. What the Supreme Court is weighing on the issue of diversity in college admissions. And the faithful departed. We learn more about Purgatory as Pope Francis asks if we desire heaven above everything else. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this Feast of All Souls. I'm Tracy Sable. While the midterm elections are next week, the 2024 presidential election also looms large. Last night, President Joe Biden went after Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, another possible presidential candidate. And, of course, former President Donald Trump may be running as well. EWTN News Nightly White House correspondent Owen Jensen is in Miami with that story.
Hi, Tracy. Yeah, the race for president in 2024, of course, is still 2 years away. Right now, all eyes are on the midterms next week and whether Americans decide to keep Democrats in control of Congress or whether they vote in Republicans to take over power. Meanwhile, rest assured that right after the midterms, the race for president will really heat up. And in Florida last night, President Biden was down here ripping into Governor Ron DeSantis while praising his Democratic challenger, Charlie Crist. Take a listen.
Charlie's a guy you know and trust. He's always working with you, fighting for working families like yours. He was a great governor before, and they make him even greater governor again because of who he's going to be replacing.
President Joe Biden will be crisscrossing the country up until the midterms on Tuesday, November 8th, in support of Democratic candidates. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump, he's been holding plenty of rallies, and the next one will be in Iowa tomorrow. We'll be there as well to cover. And there's speculation that, depending on how Republicans do in the midterms, that President Trump could emphasize, make an announcement to run for president in the days and weeks right after the midterms. That remains, of course, to be seen. Reporting in Miami, Florida, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, in the fight for control of the U.S. Senate, two states, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, are pivotal. And in the final week, Democrats and Republicans are pouring millions of dollars into those campaigns. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us with more of what is at stake.
Both Senate races will have a major role in what gets done in the new Congress come January. One thing's for sure, both sides agree. Republicans and Democrats say that this election will impact the future direction of the country.
It's crucial. I mean, if you want to literally save this country, if you want to unify and heal it, it's got to be us. It has to be we, the people. We're not going to get helped by the, bulk of the mainstream media. Obviously, the radical leftists that are the Democratic Party right now, they're destroying this country.
Senator Ron Johnson is running for a third term against the state's Lieutenant Governor, Democrat Mandela Barnes. New national polls show Johnson with a slight lead, but political analysts say the race is a toss-up. Meanwhile, the battle is on in Pennsylvania to replace retiring Republican Senator Pat Toomey. GOP candidate Mehmet Oz is pushing crime prevention in the final days of the campaign.
So I vow here and now that as a U.S. Senator, I'll do the right thing for our communities. Amongst them, I'm going to let police do their jobs. Just do your job.
And questions persist about the health of his opponent, Democrat John Fetterman, the state's lieutenant governor. He suffered a stroke in May, but he says his doctors have given him the thumbs up.
I just believe that we have our doctors just weigh in on that, and they believe that I'm fit to serve, and that's a point that was compatible made in June.
Recent polls have him in a dead heat. Democrats say the midterm elections are all about turnout, especially among young people.
That their standard of living is lower than their parents, can't afford housing, who have a passionate concern about racism and sexism and homophobia and xenophobia. I just want to make sure that they understand how terribly important this election is and see if we can get them out to vote.
Voter turnout will also play a major role in the House elections, where some political experts say that Republicans could win as many as a dozen or more seats. just like they did 2 years ago. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
All three of the nation's largest pharmacy chains are settling billion-dollar lawsuits involving prescription opioids. CVS, Walgreens, and Walmart have tentatively agreed to pay at least $12 billion to settle thousands of suits. According to Bloomberg, the claims were brought by state and local governments. They allege the retailers mishandled prescriptions of opioid painkillers. The National Health Service of England has issued new guidance on transgender treatments for children. The NHS says gender dysphoria in children is often a temporary, quote, phase, and it is restricting use of puberty blockers and sex-changing hormones. The revised policy was released following a review of existing programs. North Korea fired 23 missiles today, prompting an air raid alert in South Korea. South Korea scrambled jets, which fired 3 weapons in response as its president demands swift action against Pyongyang. The North's launches came hours after it threatened to use nuclear weapons in response to joint military drills being held by the U.S. and South Korea. And we go now to Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, great to see you as always. What more can you tell us about this missile launch, and how seriously should we take the threat from North Korea to use nuclear weapons on South Korea and the U.S.?
The most significant aspect of this, Tracy, is that one of those North Korea missiles fell south of the northern limit line, which is the UN-drawn de facto boundary between the South and the North in the sea. And so the United States and South Korea fired a missile north of the northern limit line, the exact distance that the North Koreans fired. This is important to establish deterrence because the North Koreans right now are trying to see how far they can get away with things. The one thing here is that I think the North believes that the international order is breaking down, and therefore they can get away with a lot. And it's up to the Biden administration to convince them that they're wrong. But so far, the Biden policy has been to just basically let North Korea do what the North Koreans want to do. I think that that's a mistake.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, South Korea's president is calling for swift action against North Korea. Your thoughts on that, and what do you think can and should be done?
The United States, I think, can back North Korea off. We have not imposed sanctions on Chinese banks that have been laundering North Korea's money. We cut off the money. We cut off the provocations. And so it's within our power. It's Section 311 of the Patriot Act to declare Chinese banks to be of primary money laundering concern. We can then disconnect them from their corresponding banking relationships in New York. And that means essentially that they can no longer conduct transactions in dollars. That's a death sentence for these Chinese banks. We have not imposed those on the largest Chinese banks for openly violating our laws. We didn't allow Pablo Escobar to run money through New York. We shouldn't allow the Chinese and the North Koreans to do so either.
Gordon, something else I want to touch on are these Chinese police stations that are set up here in the U.S. and also around the world. China claims that they provide services for Chinese nationals living abroad. However, there are reports of harassment and threats. What else can you tell us about these places?
Well, this fixed location in New York on the Lower East Side is a violation of our sovereignty. Yes, they want to provide services to the Chinese, but you have to do that through a consulate or an embassy, and you have to get permission to open them. Now, the Chinese felt so bold to open up this unofficial location because we have allowed, and this goes back to the Obama administration, we have allowed China's consular officials and its Ministry of State Security agents to openly operate on our soil. So, of course, the Chinese thought they could get away with this. This is, of course, a problem of Chinese aggressiveness, but this is our country, Tracy. We could have prevented this. We didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Gordon, we have probably about a minute left or so, but I'm curious, what else is on your radar?
The workers fleeing the Zhengzhou plant of Foxconn, which makes about half the world's iPhones. This really shows that the Chinese people have fed up with the COVID controls and that they're openly defying them. This is a story to watch because now the government has imposed a lockdown, a one-week lockdown on the plant. We'll see what the Chinese people do in response.
And we're going to leave it right there. Gordon, great to be with you as always. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you, Tracy.
Well, the Kremlin says NATO is building up troops near the Russian border. Russian military leaders say there are 30,000 NATO troops near the border. Meantime, Moscow says that it will resume its participation in a deal that allows grain from Ukraine to reach the rest of the world. Coming up, why the Supreme Court is weighing legal challenges to affirmative action. Plus, a preview of the Holy Father's visit to a Mideast nation. The Supreme Court is weighing in on just how far U.S. colleges can go to achieve a diverse student body. At issue, admissions policies at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. Both colleges use race as an admissions factor. And joining us here in our studio today is Jeremiah Poff, education reporter with the Washington Examiner. Jeremiah, great to be with you.
Thanks for having me on.
So those who are not familiar with this case, can you give us a brief synopsis of what's going on here?
So you have the Supreme Court is hearing or heard a case on Monday challenging the constitutionality of affirmative action. You have two cases that were involved here. One was a group called Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, and then a second one from the same group against the University of North Carolina. The Harvard case is unique because the group alleges that this Ivy League prestigious university is discriminating against Asian American students by artificially suppressing the number that they admit through various means. The UNC case is a little less straightforward, or a little less controversial, I guess, in that it's just more challenging the admission practices of whether or not you can consider race in college admissions, which is also part of the Harvard case.
Yeah, and I know that both schools are defending their use of race as an admissions factor, saying it helps to achieve a diverse student body. I'm curious, what do the judges have to say about that?
Right. So it was kind of interesting. You see, with the justices kind of through their questioning, kind of making clear kind of where they were leaning one way or another. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was recused from the Harvard case because she was formerly a member of the Board of Overseers there, but she did participate in the oral arguments for the UNC case, and she was very much concerned about that this could lead to equal protection violations and stuff like that. And then, although in the Harvard case, Justice Alito really pressed the Harvard lawyer Seth Waxman on how they rated Asian applicants on their personality score, which were significantly lower than students of other races. So there was the lawyer for Harvard didn't really kind of danced around the issue and didn't quite offer a straight answer, but Alito really pressed him on that.
Yeah, what do you think this will mean ultimately for public and also private colleges?
Well, if the court rules the way many people expect them to, which is likely a 6-3 conservative majority ruling outlying affirmative action and overturning the 2003 case of Greta versus Bollinger, which is what the Harvard plaintiffs have asked, you could see universities would no longer be able to consider race as a factor when admitting a student. Currently, they're allowed to do so on a very limited basis as a kind of a secondary consideration. So if you have two students that have the same SAT scores, the same GPA, okay, well, we're going to admit the black student or the Hispanic student over the Asian or the white student. So they would no longer be able to do that. They'd have to look at other factors to make the distinction between the two students.
And when are we expecting a decision to come down?
Probably sometime in the spring. Most of the controversial decisions don't come until June, so that'll probably be one.
All right, all eyes will be on that. We have probably about a minute left or so. But what else are you following? What are you working on?
Well, with the midterm elections coming up next week, most people are focusing on Congress and the Senate, obviously the Senate races and the House races. I'm focused a little bit more on the school board races down ballot, and I think there's been a much stronger interest in this issue lately, and over the last year especially, Governor DeSantis in Florida endorsed to a number of school board races this year, and so I think you're seeing a renewed interest among conservatives in these nonpartisan races, taking on whether or not, running for school board races and trying to flip those seats from more tilted toward the teacher union favored candidates.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. Jeremiah, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Up next, the Holy Father asks us an important question about our attitude for reaching heaven. Plus, on the Feast of All Souls, what the Catholic Church teaches about purgatory. Pope Francis has a question for the faithful. Do we desire heaven above everything else?
Guardiamo in alto perché siamo in cammino verso l'alto.
At Mass at the Vatican for All Souls Day, the Holy Father reminds us that the gospel provides a blueprint for how to live. We should love others as God loves us. For those who succeed, their final encounter with God will be like a feast. The Mass was held to remember the cardinals and bishops who have died over the past year. As we mentioned, today is the Feast of All Souls, where we pray especially for the dead who are believed to be in purgatory. But what exactly is purgatory, and why does the Catholic Church teach about it, and why? Joining us now to discuss this is best-selling author Susan Tassone, also known as the Purgatory Lady. Susan, great to have you on.
Tracy, happy All Souls Day. Thanks for having me.
Oh, Susan, it's a pleasure. You as well. I know that you say this is actually one of the top issues that Catholics wonder about. So why does the Church believe in purgatory, and who are these souls in purgatory, and why do we need to pray for them?
Oh, those are great questions. It's our duty. It's part of the doctrine of our faith, and it's our privilege to pray for them. They're not a third party, Tracy, as I thought of years ago, that there's some abstract group out there that you can't get your arms around. No, there are brothers, there are sisters, there are mothers, our priests, our consecrated religious, our doctors, our neighbors, who were weaved into the fabric of our lives that had a tremendous impact on us. So that's who they are. Why do they need our help? Because once the soul leaves the body, Tracy, the time of merit ceases. So the soul is completely helpless. They're either paying a debt in purgatory, or they're in heaven, or God forbid, they're in hell. And what do they need from us, I would ask? What is the most important thing that they need? They need the sacrifice of the Mass. They need the body and blood of Jesus. They need Gregorian Masses. Those are a big comeback has happened with those Gregorian Masses. There are 30 Masses in a row. For one to see so popularized by Pope St. Gregory, he had 30 Masses offered for one of his monks. And on the 30th day, the monk appeared to Pope Gregory and to his brother, Copiosus, who was taking care of him during his last illness. And he said he was released from purgatory on the 30th day. Why 30 days, Tracy? Why not 31? Why not 42? Because Pope St. Gregory was trying to bring back the tradition of Moses and Aaron and Jacob, what they did in the Old Testament, and the days that they prayed for their dead, and they honored their dead by doing works of charity, actually, for 30 days. We can see it when a pope dies. You see this black bunting across across the doors of churches for 30 days. So that's where that 30-day came from. Where do you get these kinds of masses? I'm on EWTN quite often with Father Mitch, and the Pious Union of St. Joseph, who actually promotes praying for the dying, is a great place to have these kinds of masses offered.
Susan, I have so many questions for you, and I wish I had more time. But one thing I want to ask you, you say the first thing on the minds of our departed loved ones is us. Explain that to us.
Yes. Oh, I just love this, because it's our family, and it's their great love for us and our love for them. They're absolutely concerned, number one, about our salvation. We're bonded to them, and they're bonded to us. So they enlighten us, they admonish us, because they don't want us to go to this workshop of purgatory, because we can't avoid purgatory. So their attitude is one of penance. Their attitude is one of only doing God's will. And so we need to submit ourselves to them and be influenced by them in order to avoid purgatory. And you know what else I noticed in all these years of research, Tracy? Who do they go to first? And I mean, I've been doing this 22 years. Who went to Padre Pio? Who went to St. Faustina? The monks that lived with him, the sisters that lived with her. And so it's natural that the family members that are in purgatory go to their family members.
And Susan, we're almost out of time, but very quickly, I want to give you the last word.
The last word: never leave, never go a day without praying for the souls in purgatory, because Mother Angelica taught me this. accidental glory. What if a soul is already in heaven? And you're still praying for them. St. Thomas Aquinas calls it accidental glory. Two things happen if that soul is already in heaven. That soul continues to get an increase in its intercessory power, which is in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 958, and it gets an increase in its intimacy with God. So the lesson is never stop praying for your dead.
Well, Susan, it was so great to be with you. This is so interesting. We're going to have to get you back on. Thank you for your time today. God bless you.
Thank you, Tracy. God bless you.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis leaves tomorrow for a 3-day visit to Bahrain. EWTN Vatican producer Alexey Gotovskiy, who will be traveling with the Holy Father, has more for us.
Tomorrow, Pope Francis will travel to the Kingdom of Bahrain, a small, predominantly Muslim island nation in the Persian Gulf. There are two main reasons of this 4-day trip. The first is to shed light on the Christians present throughout the Arabian Peninsula, where they live side by side with a Muslim majority. And the second is to bring about an appeal for peace. In Bahrain, the Catholic community is made up of around 100,000 people, which is about 15% of the total population. The Christians there are mostly migrant workers from other parts of Asia. However, Bahrain also has around 1,000 citizens who are Catholics. Bahrain is almost 300 times smaller than Italy and about the size of New York City. It might be small, however, it is the center of the Apostolic Vicariate of Northern Arabia, serving around 2.5 million Catholics, including those living in Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. In the neighboring Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there are no Catholic churches, and Christians are only allowed to practice their faith privately within their homes. The apostolic trip will hopefully shed light on this situation. Bahrain, however, is the first Gulf state to allow the construction of a Catholic church, the first on the Arabian Peninsula in modern times. Built in 1939 in Bahrain's capital city of Manama, it was consecrated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Pope Francis will visit this church and meet with the priests, the religious and pastoral workers. The other Catholic church in Bahrain is the Cathedral of Our Lady of Arabia. It is located some 11 miles to the south of Manama in the city of Awali. The church was recently constructed on land granted by the King of Bahrain, His Majesty Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa. The King personally presented a model of the cathedral to the Pope while visiting the Vatican in 2014. The second reason for Pope Francis to travel to Bahrain is to facilitate peaceful dialogue among the religions. Shia Muslims make up the majority of the Bahrainese population. However, the ruling class are Sunni Muslims. This division of power has recently caused some protests and political tensions. This is why ways for peace and dialogue are sought by many groups in Bahrain. Pope Francis will appeal for peace together with the leading authority of Sunni Muslims, Sheikh Ahmed Al-Taib, at the interreligious conference entitled East and West for Human Coexistence. This will be the 39th apostolic journey and first ever papal trip to the Kingdom of Bahrain. From Rome, Alexey Gotovskiy, EWTN News Nightly.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.